So Amy and I, we are so happy to be here with you this morning. First of all, this is such a beautiful town. And also we're in a region that so clearly cares about its community. And that's really wonderful to see because seeing industry and education and counselors come together like this is very rare. And Amy and I have been doing this for a while and we can truthfully say that we don't see it very often. And I can say too, as a millennial, it's really wonderful to see people coming together and working to understand my generation. So I do really appreciate that too.
And as a baby boomer, I am a baby boomer. We'll get that out front right to begin with. I was really excited to be here too. And as a former teacher and as a businesswoman, this was a very exciting idea to me. And I was particularly pleased that I would get to present with Hannah. When she joined the Bridgeworks team, I was the elder statesman on the team, and I was really excited because she came in with this energy. She was so young, she was so cool, she was so
was so young and so cool. It's amazing actually how you are part of this young, cool, hip generation, and then you quickly realize that you are not anymore. And I was actually reminded of this recently. I was talking to my brother, and he and his wife, they are the best parents. You know, they're the kind of parents who celebrate the firsts for all of their kids. I'm sure there are people in the room who do this too. You know, the first day of kindergarten, the first time you tie your shoes, the first time you ride a bike. So you can imagine that when you lose your first tooth, it's huge, right? It's like the circus comes to town. And their daughter Ella, she recently lost her first tooth. So they got really, really excited because they have this whole thing that they do. They wait until she falls asleep. And then as soon as she does, they put a little dot of glue on her forehead and some glitter. So that when she wakes up in the morning, it's like a fairy that flew over her head. It's really sweet.
so over the top.
But it's so sweet. It's so sweet. And so they're all ready for it. You know, she's about to go to sleep and they're waiting in the wings, all excited. And then their older son walks by. And he's like, Mom, Dad, what are you guys doing? He's like, what do you mean? What are we doing? The tooth fairy's coming. Come on, you know, shh. He's like, oh, guys, she knows the tooth fairy isn't real. What do you mean she knows the tooth fairy isn't real? She's 6. She doesn't know up from down. How could she possibly know? And he looks at them and he says, she Googled it. So, you know, I hear this story from my brother and I'm like, what? I am ancient. This cannot be true.
So now you know how I felt when you came to work at Bridgeworks.
Now I know. Yes, I have a better understanding of that.
Right. So these generational moments, these disconnects between the generations, when they happen in our personal lives, they're kind of awkward, painful, as Hannah's been learning.
Mm-hmm.
But when they happen in our working lives, in the schools and in the industries where we work, then they're serious because they cost us. They really cost us something. And just because of human nature, we tend to teach as we were taught, we tend to manage as we were managed, naturally. But change has been moving so quickly that now those techniques that worked with one generation, maybe work with our generation, don't work with the next generation. It's endemic. It's all throughout the culture, in schools and in business. So if it doesn't work, then we have to learn the new techniques, the new ways of approaching the different generations to genuinely engage them, particularly the millennials, which we'll be emphasizing today. I'm so glad that as you work to do that and to prepare the workforce of the future, that you have chosen to use generations as kind of a building block, as a shared vocabulary, as a tool that you can use as you come together in this confluence. Now, I want to address the kind of the gorilla in the corner of the room, and that's stereotypes. Because when we think about the other generations, sometimes the first thing that pops up are those negative stereotypes, those assumptions we jump to. You know, I did walk in the snow both ways. Uphill to, yeah, I did. That's a lie. Those assumptions that we jump to. And when we do that, we go to a negative place. You know, we've all been in those conversations. This generation, that, in my time, this, we've been in those conversations. What we want to do today is create a different energy, a positive energy, where we look at each other more genuinely. And that's one reason Hannah and I wanted to show you this particular campaign from Ameriprise, because it captures that productivity, innovation, and even fun that can come when the generations really do collaborate.
Stuart, can I see you in my office, please?
Thank you. My hands are squeaking very sick.
You didn't hurt that, Mr. Pig?
Stuart, I just opened my Ameritrade account.
Let's light this candle. Let's go to Ameritrade.com. It's easier than falling in love. What do you feel like buying today, Mr. Pig?
Kmart.
So research it. All this stuff is provided for you free of charge.
No cost.
Yeah, that's synonymous with free.
Looks like a good start.
Let's buy.
Let's buy 100 shares.
All right, quick it in there. How about 500?
100, Stuart.
You feel the excitement you have to buy stock.
Okay. Oh, fabulous. I'm thrilled. What that cost me?
$8, my man.
$8.
$8. Ride the wave of the future, my man. I get this is soda. I'm sorry, Mr. Pig. I'm having a party on Saturday night if you really want to go.
I'm going to try and get there.
Happy trading.
Thank you.
Rock on.
All right, Stuart.
Wait for the party.
So Ameritrade, they released this campaign into the marketplace, and it got a huge reaction. I mean, people were writing in, "This is hilarious. I'm Mr. B. I'm Stuart. This is so funny." And Amy and I have seen it a countless number of times, and of course we still laugh, and noticed you were laughing too. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, why is this so funny? Or what is unexpected about this commercial? Yeah.
The truth of it is so glaring and in your face.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I was laughing at Stuart because he's a little
He is a little wacko. His crazy hair, and his dance moves, which definitely need some work. Yeah.
The boss was totally relying on that kid's expertise. Yeah.
Completely. And you know, how often do we see generations portrayed like this in today's media? Not very often. The media really has this tendency to perpetuate these stereotypes about the generations. But what this commercial does so well is it shows people being themselves and learning from each other. And that's really when the magic happens, and those are the kinds of relationships that we work to create at Brickworks. So let's take a look at who the generations are in today's workplace. We're going to go through these here, and we always do like to get a gauge of who is in the room, so you can feel free to bump yourself down a generation if you want to. It'll be fine. So let's start with our traditionalists. This is the group born before 1946, a group of 75 million. We're traditionalists in the room. All right, great.
Let's give it up for this.
Okay, how about baby boomers born between 46 and 64, bigger than 80 million?
Whoa, hello.
Yes.
I am at home among my people. I love this.
When you all cheered before, I was like, of course, boomers are cheering. The extras are like, yep, there you go. You're away. So where's Generation X?
Ooh.
All right. Ooh, big
Well
numbers there.
represented.
Okay, and finally, how about my group, the millennials, 1980, 1995, big group of 80 million?
1, 2, 3, 4. You
All
got
right,
it.
that's great. That's wonderful. Usually when we do this, all of the millennials are at one table and they're like, so how many of you feel like you aren't really in one generation? You kind of feel like you're in two. You kind of straddle those years. Okay, so that is common, and we have a name here. We call you cuspers. And what we find is that initially, a lot of people who are cuspers, they don't really feel part of this generational conversation because they don't so solidly fit into one group. But what we actually find is cuspers are the people, because they have one foot in each generation, they really naturally become great communicators and great mediators and great counselors because they can see those different perspectives so easily. So I did just want to point out those cuspers.
Yeah, if you're a cusper and you've got one foot in one generation, one foot in the other, you are generationally bilingual. You can put that on your resume, take it to the bank.
Everyone look at it.
We have defined ourselves just now by birth years, essentially by age. But I want to be clear about what that means. Because when we look at these generations, as we study the generations, we don't just define by age. What we're really looking at is a set of events and conditions. What we're really looking at is the fact that each of us lives our lives against the backdrop of history. You know, it's so big and we're like fish in water, we swim in it, we don't see it. But we grow up in a certain time that has a certain feeling. And those events and conditions that shape the times shape us. So that as a group, if a group of us who are basically the same age, grow up during those formative years, those teenage years and those adolescent years, and and we have experienced those same things, then that shapes us. Especially during, you're educators, you know, those formative years. Those years when we're deciding about careers and life and our expectations. Those basic attitudes are shaped during those formative years. When we share events during those years, then as a group, we develop a kind of generational personality that stays with us all of our lives. As a group. This is not a study of individual psychology, but of those big group traits and tendencies. To help you get grounded in your own generation and in those conditions that shape you, we're going to do an interactive exercise. I'd like for you to look on your tables and you'll find some sheets that are upside down. And they have 4 columns on them. What I'd like for you to do first is choose the column, which applies to you, and look down that column. Look for things, not just things you remember, but things that help shape who you are today. Maybe shape the work you do today. Look for things that had an effect on you and helped shape you. Take just a couple of minutes and do that. And then we'll share that. Okay, thank you very, very much. I am always energized by the energy of the conversations that emerge from this simple list. It's powerful how we sink into those memories so quickly. And I urge you to take these handouts with you back and with your coworkers, with other teachers, with whomever you're working with, and share some of this because it can really prompt a conversation that helps you work together and understand each other.
Sure. So I'm wondering if some of you in the room here, we were kind of walking around and talking to a few people, and I'm wondering if anyone is willing to share a little bit about what they talked about at their table. If not necessarily about yourself, maybe something interesting you heard from someone else.
I'll share.
Okay, great. So what would you like to share?
I'm a baby boomer, and looking down the list, I actually got these pimples of things that I haven't thought about in the last 20 years are shooting up at me. And one of the things that just really stuck out was All in the Family, because it was it was one of our favorite shows, and it brought the whole family together to watch it, and seeing things happen on TV that you never thought ever happened on a show that just opened up biases, and to this day we say Archie Bunker, and all you have to say is the word, and my husband is just laughing.
Yes. Did you hear what she said? All in the Family and Archie Bunker? Yeah, things that we never would have talked about otherwise were talked about on television. It kind of broke the conversation open in so many areas. It was
It
powerful.
made for so many other shows, so it was really, unbelievably important.
It was.
For the years in television industry.
It really
Kind of
was.
paved the way for the generations after television, definitely. Yeah.
I'm a boomer also, but when I taught social studies, I was teaching in the Gen X and millennial. So I had to understand those events and find way to get across. So
Sure.
many of the Gen X events are more meaningful to me than my generation.
Yeah, when we parent or when we teach, the generation we're teaching or parenting is so profoundly affected that it has a strong effect on us too, even though it didn't happen during those, quote, formative years. What she said, I want to make sure everybody can hear, was that what happened in our 20s shapes our lives so much. Maybe what happened in our teens was more like a snapshot. That's so interesting you should say that, because you probably know about the new research things that have come out in just the last few years that shows how our brains continue to develop, and those frontal lobes in particular continue to develop well into our 20s. And so those circumstances when we first enter the workplace often have a profound shaping effect on us too. Yeah.
And part of too of who we are when we first enter that workplace. We talk about, for example, something like 9/11, clearly that impacted every single generation in but how it impacted, say, a 12-year-old is very different than how it impacted a 27-year-old. And so it's just kind of these qualities that a generation has somewhat unknowingly from their experiences in their teen years, and then that's what they hear that first time in the workplace, and then it kind of grows from there. So yeah, thanks for sharing. It is very interesting. The brain chemistry around it is fascinating.
One more thing let's share before we move on. Who else would like to heard something that surprised you or found something that surprised you? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I don't know if it's surprising, but I'm dating because I raised my hand in the wrong place. Anyway, so it was John Kennedy for two reasons. One is, besides the fact that it was tragic death, I think John Kennedy, for me, made us believe, he made the country believe that we could be more than we were.
Yes.
And he said we were going to go to the moon. And we went to the moon, and those 4 letters NASA put chills up your spine. Really.
I'm getting chills as you say this because it's bringing back that visceral memory.
It was a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
You know, for those years, to see it happen, to see these giant ships go up there, to see people floating around, working up there, and stuff like that. And the good news is, we're back in space with SpaceX. And we're here with
Spoken like a true boomer, right?
Yes.
You said we could go to the moon, we did, and now we're back in space, right? We boomers, we're bullish always. It's part of who we are.
Right. And you know, I mean, we talked about a little bit at this table, we talked about for baby boomers, NASA and the man on the moon, all those words, it does bring up chills because you get so excited and optimistic about this possibility that happened during your generation.
Now, let's talk about Gen Xers.
Gen
I say
Xers.
NASA Gen Xers, what comes to mind?
Challenger.
Whoa, that's a downer. Look at the difference between the optimism of a man on the moon and the devastation of the Challenger, and I'm watching that over and over and over on television. Very different era, very different generational shaping events. You know what? We have not heard from a millennial. I think we should.
Guys, there's one millennial in the room who wants to share something.
Millennials, come on, we know you're out there.
I think there are 3. So not to put you on the spot. I can help out if you say something, I'll say my memory of it or something.
I just think there was a lot of like fear-based things with 9/11 and Columbine.
There's a lot of fear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It changed a lot that way.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. If you look on the millennial list, this is pointed out to us a lot. People are like, the first 9 things are scary and depressing. And it's true, because as a generation, a lot due to technology, we were able to see scary things happen right away, and that's kind of the world we grew up in. So, you know, as we gotten older, we're very sensitive to privacy and safety, a lot more from an early age compared to some other.
Yeah, and you probably noticed that in the schools and in the businesses, safety has become much more prevalent, and it's on the minds of millennials much more than on the older minds of older generations. Did you hear the funny comment at the front table when she said you want to hear from millennials? Check the Facebook page. Yeah.
That's accurate.
Okay, let's do music trivia.
Let's do music trivia. Thank you everyone for sharing. Really appreciate it. So, you know, I think that sometimes too when we talk about the generations, everyone kind of, it's competitive. You know, who has the best fashion, the best movies, the best music, the best rock stars. So we're going to tap into that competitive spirit a little bit and play some music trivia. So at your tables, there should be a music trivia answer key. There's 1 page. So if you want to designate someone to fill out the answers, you have to really trust this person.
You're playing as a team at your table.
Yes, you're playing a team. So the way it works, so this is how it goes. You're going to play a song, and then you're going to write down the name of the song, the name of the artist, and an answer to a trivia question. Okay, name of song, name of artist, answer to a trivia question. 2 rules here. Do not shout out your answers because this is competitive unless you want to be strategic and shout out an incorrect answer or something. Everyone has their different strategies. Number 2, absolutely no smartphones. No Shazam, no SoundHound, no cheating, okay? All right, so here we go. Let's get started with music trivia number 1. Okay, name of song, name of artist, and the trivia question is, what country does this singer hail from? What country does this singer hail from? Okay.
They're very confident at least.
I know, I know, it's like, boom, we did it.
Yeah, got it.
All right, music trivia number 2. Okay, name of song, name of artist, and the question is, what was this singer's not so colorful nickname? What was this singer's not so colorful nickname? I kind of heard someone shut out an answer. So maybe somebody can find it. All right, music trivia number 3. All right, name of song, name of artist. Trivia question is, this song was on the soundtrack for what 80s movie?
That's a Gen X question.
This song was on the soundtrack for what 80s movie? Whenever we do this with millennials, at least one person in the room was in the play in high school.
Okay, we will come back to music trivia.
Yes.
We'll be on questions.
So you can just put those away, we will bring it back out. But right now we're going to shift our focus. We're going to shift our focus to the millennial generation. So as the millennials have entered the workforce, we have caused massive collisions, and I'm sure that you're all kind of aware of some of those collisions. So what we want to do first is really give you an understanding of those events and conditions that shape who the millennials are and shapes how we are today in the workforce and in the classroom. So when we talk about millennials, of course, we have to talk about technology because it has played a huge role. And while other generations were kind of merging onto this information superhighway, we were, for better or for worse, born in the fast lane. And it completely shapes the way we do everything. The way we buy, the way we sell, the way we work, the way we learn, everything. But above all, it's completely changed the rate at which change happens. It's moving at a blistering pace. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. When I first entered school, Apple released one of their first personal computers, the Apple 87.
I hear laughter. Does anybody have this one?
Looks ridiculous.
Yeah. Did anybody have the Commodore? I did. Yes. It played Pong.
So the total storage on this computer was 128 kilobytes. Just to put that into perspective, that is the size of one tweet on Twitter today. So by the time I graduated from university, that computer had been turned into an iPhone that could download ringtones 10 times the size of the storage of the Apple 87. So another big way that the millennial generation experienced change was the way we experienced violence. And every generation had their fair share of violence, but for the most part it was happening oceans away, or it was happening on TVs in your living room. But we are the generation of Columbine, of the 7/7 London bombings, 9/11, Virginia Tech. Violence was happening in the desks next to us. So one thing that we do study is we look at public education funding, and we see after Columbine there's this huge influx in funding for things like guidance counselors. And when we were growing up, we had these counselors, and we had our parents and priests and rabbis, and everyone was asking us to speak up. Everyone was asking us to talk about how we felt and to bring our voice to the table, and they were asking our opinions from a very early age. So as a result, this has made us an incredibly collaborative generation.
The generation had a voice.
Yes.
Now, we baby boomer parents are partially responsible for that. I'll take credit. I have 2 millennial daughters. And I did talk with them about basically everything. How many boomer parents are in? Did you pretty much talk with your kids about everything? It was a time as the 90s. We felt like we needed to. It was a way of keeping them safe. But when I was growing up, I couldn't talk to my parents about everything. What were some of the things, if you're my age, what were some of the things you could not talk to your parents about? Oh, listen, we can say it now. Did you hear that? We have come so far. Yes. Sex, money, drugs. There were a lot of things that were off the table. Not so for our millennial kids. We made decisions with them, family decisions. They had a voice in those decisions. conversations, it was collaborative, and we discussed everything with them. Another thing that was different for my generation was that at 18, I was out the door. It was mutual. My parents were ready for me to be independent. I was ready to be independent. Yeah, it was like that was, so it was an agreed upon event. That did not happen, as you know, for the millennial generation. Hannah and I recently found a Google ad that it just came out in the last couple of months that really nails that ongoing collaborative relationship between boomer parents and millennial young people.
No, I'm fine. Can we do this again tomorrow?
Anytime.
I miss having my own room.
What do you think?
That's a little better.
A little better?
Yeah. This is my boyfriend, Jamie. Love you. Alright, well, I'm gonna stay out too late, okay?
Bye, alligator.
See you later, alligator.
I gotta go call my daughter.
I know. It's such a sweet commercial. So we have these close relationships with our parents, and we're really tech savvy, and we're really collaborative. But we definitely have some issues as well. And we know we've been referred to as narcissistic, entitled, lazy, and if we don't just hear these on the street, it's everywhere in the news. We are well aware of all of these different.
Underemployed or just lazy?
I don't know. So we are well aware of this. So that's really what we're going to be spending our time on the rest of today, is talking about these obstacles and talking about where millennials are bumping up against other generations in today's workplace.
We will destroy our cities? What are you going to do to us?
I
This is
don't
so
know. I mean, I
silly.
have to say, as a millennial, of course I'm biased, but I don't think that all of these are true. And we'll talk about that.
Well, and as a baby boomer, I have to say, I do remember similar headlines about my generation. We were navel-gazing hippies. We were going to destroy civilization as it was known. So, maybe there was a little hype around this. First, as we look at the generations today, and we look at the way that millennials, this generation is going to destroy our cities, and we look at how that millennial generation is bumping up against each of the other generations, then we'll be able to define some of the differences and some of the solutions to that. Let's look first at the traditionalists. Sometimes people say, oh, wait a minute, why are we looking at traditionalists when there aren't many of them left in our businesses or in our schools? But we must look there. We must look there because traditionalists were builders. They built our schools, they built our businesses, and their style of leadership and their style of communication is with us today, absolutely. What shaped that generation? That generation of builders. A couple of things come to mind. The Great Depression. I can walk into my house today and say to my traditionalist mother, "Oh, Mom, that's a beautiful dress." Do you know what she says? This whole thing, it was on sale. Yes, she will tell me to the penny how much it costs, to the penny. Yes, because she learned the value of a penny growing up. Then there was World War II, and all that entailed for the people who served, and the women who served, and for their families. So we get a generation that is intensely patriotic, physically conservative, loyal, and most of all has faith in institutions. Whether that institution is your school or your business, they believe in that institution as a way of making the world better. That's a profound faith that that generation had as they built the institutions that serve us today. That's, yes. Yeah.
I also feel like they had faith in other things.
Yes, and a religious faith, absolutely, a profound faith. And that's a legacy, that's a huge legacy. Now there's another legacy that we get from them too, and that is a style of communication, right? Top-down military command and control communication tends to be the way that communication in the businesses happen during the traditionalist style. Now, you know this style because you know the answer to this question. When, under that style of communication, when the boss says jump, you say, excellent, very good, you're very good at that.
Right. So, but if you say jump to someone
I can't.
my generation,
What's she gonna say?
what do we say?
Why?
Why?
Or like, I got a whole new way of jumping, let me show you.
Right, we were actually doing this in work. There was a millennial in the room, and we said, you know, we used to jump to, what do we say? And he's like, screw you! Okay.
Those Canadians, you know?
Yeah, north of the border, I guess. I don't know. But we question, and we ask why, because we grew up in an environment where we could question and talk openly with authority from, you know, the age of 3.
Yeah, and so that collaboration was just part of who you are.
Yep.
I think one way to get a grip on this difference, this major cultural shift between jump and why, is to look at a couple of visuals. If we look at this, we see the traditionalist style of communication messaging. Now, if this is your style of communication, there are some assumptions you make about the way that information is held. Where is the information on this chart? It's at the top. Where's it going to stay? At the top. The only communication is vertical, and notice that every level is essentially a roadblock to communication. Now, when I entered the workplace, this was how the workplace looked to me. This was how it functioned, and that felt perfectly natural because this was the way my whole world looked. Everything, church, Rotary Club, community, government, family, everything was stratified. That's the way it worked. That was natural. But let's flash forward a couple of generations, and I look at my millennial daughters, and they enter the workplace, and it looks like this to me. Yeah, it looks like this to them. The whole world looks like this to them. Their experience of the classroom, of church, of community looks more like a network than a hierarchy. There are different assumptions about communication under this model. It's faster, and who do you have access to? Everybody. What information do you have access to with this model? All of it.
And about this model too, when I look at this, I see that communication. I can talk to anyone at any time. That's the world that I know. But what this also shows is a fluidity of constant change. Our entire world has been changing at such a fast rate from such a young age. And I think, if you just even think in the past 15 years in your industry and education, there's been a lot of change going on there too. And a lot of this change is due to technology. It has really just advanced that rate so fast, and it's moving so rapidly. And a big part of that is that we can access information at anywhere at any time. And no one can really navigate this black hole of information like millennials can. So the way this kind of works for us is we learn something. We read something in an article, we read something in a book, and then a week later, we see that something has changed. And we can look it up online, and it's something completely different. Maybe there's a slight modification. So what is in this text is outdated. So you can understand that when we are in the classroom, when we are in the workplace for the first time, we feel this pressure to know how what we're learning is going to be relevant a year from now, or is going to be relevant 3 years from now. And this is a big challenge for millennials when we learn something. And I was talking to Kim, Director of Counseling at Keene High, and she said her students come to her with these questions all the time. They ask, when will I use this? They ask, why do I need to know this?
A question that would not have occurred to me as a baby boomer.
Right.
I learned for learning's sake. I learned what they told me to learn. I really did. But when we're dealing with millennials, this an important tip, whether we're in the workplace or whether we're in education, we have to answer the why. We have to explain why again and again and again. And it's because millennials they're going to push back. They're going to say, why does this case study matter? Why do I need to know this information? They want to know what is practical. They want to know what is applicable because of the speed of change with which they've grown up.
And when we learn those different things, when that why is explained to us, it feels like reality. It feels like we can put ourselves in those shoes of another person. We can understand how it is going to benefit us in real life. And when I was talking to Kim, she said that something that she does, which I think is so wonderful, is people come from the industry into the classroom. And I was talking to Sue about this too, and you talk to alumni and you have people come in and say, I was in your shoes 5 years ago, 1 year ago. And I can tell you that what I learned here has benefited me so much, and this is how. So, you know, for other generations, for baby boomers and traditionalists, and even Xers too, this is something that you didn't have to have people connect the dots for you. This is something you already knew. You knew that what you were doing was important because it was going to help you later on.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up the word engagement while we're here.
Yes.
Because especially in the business world, we hear that word engagement a lot. How do you engage millennials? And one of the keys when we look at managers who have millennials who work for them, who are engaged, is that relentless explanation of why.
And I will say, you know, it doesn't take much. It's just one traditionalist or someone of another generation just kind of taking a millennial under their wing for a little bit. Because we as millennials, I mean, we know that the other generations, they can definitely always teach us a thing or two.
I'm glad you know that.
Pull out your music trivia. We're going to do some more songs. All right.
Nothing like experience.
All right, music trivia number 4. You ready? Sorry, I just have to say that one a little bit longer. Pleasure. Okay, name a song.
It's allowed, by the way.
Totally.
It's allowed.
Name a song, name of artist, and the trivia question is, she was the lead singer for what group in the 90s? She was the lead singer for what group in the 90s? All right, number 5. All right, name a song, name of artist, and the trivia question is, name the 3 brothers in this group. Tough one, I know. Name the 3 brothers in this group. All right, so music trivia away again. I promise we are going to bring it back out.
I love using music trivia because it does bring up like this visceral memory of a time and a place. And engage you in hearing.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, baby boomers. Baby boomers are called baby boomers because we were born in massive numbers. There are a lot of us. It's fabulous. And but we are immortal. And so now I think millennials outnumber us. Is that right?
We do. We outnumber you by just a little bit.
Yeah. And you're going to out-earn us in 5 years. So
Well, let's see.
it's a scary thing. No, that's what they do. Okay. All right. So we were born in massive numbers. We were the biggest generation to hit this country ever. It was phenomenal. The birth rate, fertility rate went up to 4 million births a year. That's 1 every 8 seconds. And we stayed there for about 20 years. You may have noticed on the earlier slide that the Gen Xers were a smaller generation. 60 million as opposed to 80 million. Do we know why the Gen Xers were a smaller generation? Birth control.
Right,
We
okay.
got boomers in the audience, that's how you know that, right. And so, I'm always interested as to which table says that, you know, it tells me a little something. Yeah, so we got the Gen Xers born after the boomers, but the boomers were huge. Now there's another boom going on while we boomers were growing up. And that was even more important, was the post-war economic boom. When I was a child, you know, the market just kept growing. Those stock market numbers just kept going up. Companies just kept growing. The economy just kept growing. As a matter of fact, I grew up near Alcoa aluminum plant, and when a neighbor would get laid off, I knew that was temporary. The meaning of the word was that it was temporary if you were laid off. So with all that growth and all that in the background, you know, a booming economy, we baby boomers became rather optimistic. We kind of assumed that growth would continue. Things would continue to get better. That when we mentioned that optimism earlier about man on the moon, there were all these reasons for us to be optimistic. Now that is a notion that Pepsi had some fun with when they released this ad.
Here come those darn hippies again. Test 1, 2, check. Okay, stay away from the green pesto sauce. It's a real bar. Is that your sunflower? Hey,
Place hasn't changed in 25 years.
yeah, it's a shame. Now they should have put in some condos by now. I'm on a low sodium, low fat diet. Well, how do you feel? Terrible.
The greenhouse goes in the upstairs bathroom.
This is the anniversary of a historic event. Which one? Watergate.
Joe, remember when we did this 25 years ago? No. Wouldn't it be nice if your youth was as easy to hold on to as an ice cold Pepsi?
Is that Coco skinny dipping again? I hope not.
Boomers are such an easy target. I love it. So, you know, paired with that optimism and that idealism is a fierce competitive spirit. Because you don't grow up with 80 million cohorts and not feel that heat on your back. So when you were in school, there weren't enough desks, there weren't enough books, there wasn't enough oil to fill your cars, and when you got into the workplace, there weren't enough jobs. So baby boomers became incredibly competitive. And they got there 5 minutes before the boss got there and left 5 minutes after the boss left because they knew that if they didn't, there were 80 million people waiting in line who would.
Yeah, earlier we mentioned that those things that affect us just as we enter the workplace, because the 60s were growth. Early 70s, we get the oil embargo and we get a contraction of the economy. Boomers are just coming to work. As Hannah said, there weren't enough jobs for us. It was very, very tight. And so in order to be seen in that crowded job market, in order to be seen among 80 million others, we had to be competitive. And one way we became competitive was to develop those marvelous interpersonal skills. We learned to read tone of voice. I know boomers who can hear 3 words on the phone and tell you not just what your mood is, but what you had for breakfast. We learned to read body language at 300 yards. And we became very, very good at meetings. We're so good at it. We love meetings.
Yes, you do.
We became very good at meetings because it gave us the ability to document it was important to our careers. We could document our contributions with meetings. Those were important to us. And it was an arena where we excelled because it was face-to-face. And we knew how to do that face-to-face stuff. No offense, but unlike some millennials who run their whole lives from a device.
Yeah, we didn't have to learn those skills from an early age. That wasn't something that we had to be good at to succeed in school. It wasn't something we had to be good at first day on the job. At least we didn't know that it was.
We didn't know that it was.
We didn't know that it was. But I will say that I do have good news here because even though we lack those face-to-face communication skills and those telephone skills just right off the bat, we want to know how to do it. and we want to learn because it is something that it is a big weakness for a lot of the millennial generation. I was actually just speaking with a college last week, and I was talking to a lot of students, and I can tell you pretty much every single one of them said, yeah, we use email for everything. It's so easy. Some of my professors, they even let us text them. It's great. I was like, okay, cool, but what about, how do you feel when you talk to them in person? And every single person said, I learned so much more when I take more time to talk to them in person, and I'm worried that I'm going to be scared to do that in the workplace because I don't have those skills, and I don't know how to do that. So we millennials, we know we don't have them, and also when we're in the workplace for the first time and we see other people succeeding because they can read body language from 300 feet away, we want to know how to do that too. So I know the challenge is here that millennials sometimes struggle to admit what they don't know. And it can be kind of hard for us. And we feel like we have so much to teach other generations too. We know all this technology and we're up on information all the time. We're always online. So the best way to really bring these generations together is through cross-generational learning. And what this does is it gives baby boomers the opportunity to teach all of these skills that they have. And when they are able to teach other people, they're really making an impact on their lives. And I think that feels pretty good, right? Sure. And for millennials, we get to teach something that we know a lot about. So it's really a lot of different perspectives, and they're going back and forth, and you're learning from each other. And that is when those magic moments happen, and these relationships are built, and then you have this strength and this bond that you can kind of carry through to your next project and through your next years in the workforce. And there are a lot of examples in the industry of how this is being done, and one in particular that I especially love is what Google is doing, because they're kind of leading by example with something that I think a lot of other industries and a lot of other companies, no matter the size, and no matter where they're located, they can all do this. So they have this program called Googler to Googler, which is a mouthful. But what it is it's this mentorship and this teaching program. And anyone from the company goes to HR, who is the one who plans everything, and they say, I'm really passionate about managing. And I would love to teach other people what I've learned about managing. And so then they get to teach it. And anyone can go, it doesn't matter your level in the company, everyone can go and learn from that person. At the same time, a young person can go in and say, I really want to teach people about Snapchat. And I think people need to understand how this can be beneficial. And so then they hold a session.
I mean, what?
Snapchat. In case you don't know. This is a new
in case
thing.
we don't know.
It's an app. And it's just a different kind of communication technology tool. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about, though. It's these opportunities to teach new things all the time. So it's this learning process that's going back and forth. And it really does just build this relationship and this strength and this bonding so we can really just continue to learn from each other.
So when I come up against a technology problem, guess whose office I go to? That cross-learning,
Yeah.
which is no longer what it was, goes against the grain for me as a big one. It does. Because when I was first went to the workplace, mentoring happened from the top down. That was the role. And I expected, as I assumed it into management, that I would always be mentoring top down. Not so. Not so. Change changed everything. Technology changed everything. So that now it's no longer a layer cake. It's an apple crisp or something. But we all have things to teach each other. Now another piece of this that gets in the way of that cross-generational collaboration is the perception of work ethic. And I use the word perception carefully because we are so different that we may not perceive the work ethic of the other generation, or we may diss the work ethic of the other generation. I know we boomers get dissed as, what have we been called? Workaholics, right? Get a life, all that stuff, Yeah. I guess there's a reason for that, because when I did go into the workplace, I did derive a lot of my identity from my job. I really did. It was a 24/7 way of being. My work was more of a calling than a job. That was just the era in which I grew up and the way that I entered the workplace. And it did result in some crazy hours. It did result in some crazy hours. And so when I look at Hannah pounding on email at midnight, but not in the office at 9, she's taking a yoga class or something, personal fulfillment time, I don't know, something. Then I can have the wrong perception about her
Right.
work ethic.
Yeah, because what we millennials do, because of how we grew up and because of technology, we work, definitely, and we live. And the two are really intertwined. We're the generation of work-life integration. We talk about Gen X, it's work-life balance. And millennials, really, they want to integrate it. So I can go to my yoga class at 9, but I know that I'm going to be working on a project from 11 to 2 a.m. And it'll be ready by the next morning, and it'll be done in time. So we have this kind of different perception of work ethic. And we do work hard, and we do want to work hard, and we are incredibly motivated.
Yeah, and we're aware that some jobs cannot be flexed. Those hours cannot be flexed for some jobs. But on the other hand, that appreciation, that mutual appreciation for work ethic has to develop given the technology that we have, or else there's a huge disconnect, or else we really can't work together. So you said that millennials are motivated.
Yes.
And I was surprised as our research over the last few years revealed what motivated millennials. I'm a boomer. Throw a new title at me. I'm motivated. Throw a little more money my way, I'm ready to work, right? But you go to the millennial generation, and because they grew up so differently, we find that they are motivated mostly by, get this, meaning. Meaning. The power of the impact of what they do, the meaning of their work, has a profound effect on them. Do you have that global study?
Yes, there was a global study. It was done by Edelman 8095. They did this really big research study of all millennials all across the globe. And they found that the number one life goal of all these millennials is having a job with purpose that matches my personal passion.
And there have been other repeated studies in which the majority of the millennials will say, yeah, I would trade this job for one that pays less money if it had more meaning. Meaning. They keep coming back to that word, meaning and purpose.
And I'm sure that many of you out there are saying, yes, of course, meaning. Everyone wants meaning in their work. That's nothing new. But the difference is that other generations, baby boomers especially, I mean, you came in, you rolled up your sleeves, you put your head down, and you worked really hard, and then you ascended into a role.
I'd have impact later on.
Exactly.
My job would have more meaning later on.
But we millennials, we come in, and on day one, that first day on the job, we want to have meaning in our work. So something that you can do to help millennials see the meaning that they're having in the work is just connecting the dots to them. And sometimes this isn't really obvious to millennials, especially if it's very common for millennials, you know, if you come right out of high school, if you're coming right out of college and you get an entry-level job, and maybe you're doing data entry every day. Or maybe you're working on a machine and you do very similar things every morning, and that's just kind of the way it works. And it's hard sometimes when you're in that routine to see the difference that you're making. And if you're in an organization that's built like a traditional org chart and you see yourself at the bottom, it's hard to understand how you contribute to the big picture. But you know, you don't have to be saving lives to have meaning in your work. So simply sitting down with a millennial and saying, what you're doing this morning, it affects Amy down the hall, and it affects her whole team of people she works with, and that team affects the company's big picture, and the big picture of the company affects the community. And it's really hard for us to see that right away. And all it takes is for someone to just plot it out for us. And then once we have that understanding and we really feel like we have meaning in that work we're doing, we'll feel more motivated the next day when we come to work. And we'll feel more motivated to work harder, to proceed on in our career and get to those different positions where we know that meaning right away.
Yeah, I loved what Molly said when she first was talking very early in the morning, and she was talking about the young guy who was sitting on the elevator and was shuffling around, and she said, you're going to build this industry.
Yes.
That's the kind of word, that's the kind of connecting the dots that millennials need. We forget, if we've been in an industry for a while, or if we've been in education for a while, you know, it's easy for us, we take it for granted. We know the impact we have on the community and on people's lives. We know that. And I tend to forget that millennials don't know that. I'll give you away. May I out you?
I suppose, yes, you can.
At the top of Hannah's speech this morning, I looked at her script, and she had written in nice big, changing lives. Changing lives. You know, this is one of those real moments. I'm moved by that. I'm moved by her commitment to changing lives. And I don't think she's alone. I don't think she's alone. Millennials may sometimes lose their way to that fact, to that goal. But if we can keep them on that path, then they're going to be engaged.
Yeah, and HP came out with this commercial that, for me as a millennial, gives me chills, and it really just calls on that powerful meaning that millennials desire.
It's something you're born with, and inspires the things you choose to do. You do what you do because it matters. At HP, we don't just believe in the power of technology. We believe in the power of people. When technology works for you, to dream, to create, to work. If you're going to do something, make it matter.
And HP aimed that, they wrote that intentionally to speak to millennials. To speak to millennials. Shall we do just a question? Because at this point we've done the traditionalists, the boomers, we're going to move to Gen Xers next. But let's do it. Are there any questions that are coming up for you? Any pushback that's coming up for you that we can just take a second and address at this point? Yes.
I'm a tail end of the boomers. I have two boys. And I just see like that commercial there. I think I've resisted the technology, so I don't want to see that I'm in competition for my son's time with technology, as opposed to using the technology differently.
Right. And I don't know if you could hear what he said, but as a boomer parent, he sometimes feels like he's in competition with the technology that was in that ad. Rather than knowing how to use it to connect, it feels like it eats your children's time in a way that you feel it's hard to compete with. Is that what I heard? Yeah. Yeah. And there's one thing that's interesting to me is as we've done the research forward, because we'll be talking about future generations today, is that they use technology in such an integrated and connected way, so that when they connect digitally, they feel it viscerally. That high tech feels like high touch the younger you are. That's a difference. I see it as, I'm a boomer too, I see that screen is separating us. But if I'm teaching high schoolers, the high schoolers I'm teaching see that screen as just, a membrane that we pass by, right?
Even the previous commercial with the father and daughter, she's in college.
Yeah.
He really embraced that. He's got a relationship going on.
That's hard, isn't it?
State, and I haven't talked to him in 2 weeks.
You don't text him? Oh,
Yeah, he texted his mother.
He texts his mother, okay.
Yes.
I have another question, and that is, as I listen to you, I'm thinking about the millennials as a generation, but I'm thinking about kind of the motivated, bright millennials. And I'm wondering, are we really talking about the entire generation, or are we really only talking about a segment of that generation?
That is a question that comes up all the time, yes.
It does. It comes up all the time because I think sometimes it's harder to see. And what I will say is that from the motivated and the bright millennials is really high quality, top people in school and everything, you see this much more easily. And it comes faster, and you see that motivation and that come through a lot more quickly. But it's in every millennial's fiber of their being deep down, because we all grew up with these events and conditions. And I think that, of course, there are always exceptions, and there are always different people and in different communities, and so that does come into play. But when we look at big trends, and when we do research, and we do research of millennials everywhere in different socioeconomic statuses and everything too, and research that comes out from other organizations, it's pretty powerful to see how we do share these qualities. I think that the difference is just that those top millennials, they exhibit them more quickly.
Yeah, and it's just more obvious when you're talking about high potential millennials, or high achievers. I shouldn't say high potentialists, I think, yes. I was, in response to what you said, Sue, I was thinking about a couple of examples of that. In industry, sometimes we're thinking, well, this is a person who has chosen a job that is kind of repetitive or transactional, and it just goes on. And so maybe this millennial isn't going to respond to these tips. But our research does tell us that, say in industry, if the manager is somebody who's collaborative, who says, how can we do this work better? And really invites that input over time, that the millennial is more likely to be engaged, less likely to leave that job. So that collaborative piece, that will you talk to me about how we do this work piece, is something that does engage millennials, no matter whether they're in a legal firm or on a factory floor. One group that I worked with was a fascinating group. They service loans. Okay, this is really boring work. These were millennials who came in by the hundreds to this company, and they would sit and they would be on the phone, and they would call somebody and say, you know, you missed your payment. This is really boring work. They read a script, and they serviced loans. Anybody here in this business servicing mortgages? Okay, all right. Do you have people on the phones? It's repetitive work. And as I was working with this group, this was in Knoxville, Tennessee, we developed a couple of things. One was that they would meet in groups to collaborate, and they would say, this was a problem for me. I came up against, the script didn't work, and they would brainstorm about ways, and the millennials were asked to brainstorm ways to answer and to have a solution to that. The other piece of that made a difference, and this is the difference that you could see the trend. Turnover basically went to nothing as soon as they began to do this, and that was their managers at the end of each week would call them together, and they measured how many calls they'd done and all that stuff. I mean, that was obviously the metrics they were working with. And then the manager would turn those into metrics that mattered, metrics that had meaning. He would say, Don, you kept 14 people in their homes this week. You resolved that situation. And just that piece of meaning for work that, was repetitive, really brought that turnover rate down in that industry. So that's just an example of situations where if you just think about how do we make this collaborative, might not look collaborative on the surface. How do we give this meaning? Might not look like it has meaning on the surface, but if we can do that, then it does help to engage those millennials.
Great.
Are there any other points, any other things you want to raise at this point? Yes.
I think one question, the question is there's a lot of manufacturers here, is when you ask the question of people where they're going to be made,
Yeah.
and what's the end?
I'm sorry, where is everything
Where is
made?
everything made? And then what's the answer to that question? When we ask people where do they think everything is made?
Where do they think everything is made?
Things hanging up in the ceiling and all that stuff, where do they all come from?
Yeah.
So who makes them?
Right. And you're saying that's a powerful piece of meaning. It's like, who made that?
That's the question. What's the answer? The answer would be China. China. That's the problem. The problem
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not only is it a problem that a lot of it is made in China, but that's where everybody thinks it's made.
Yes.
So if you think everything's made someplace else and it never occurs to you, you might actually help out to make it.
Exactly. Exactly. Because we have that
Here,
perception.
we make it big buildings that have walls and fences around them and stuff nobody can see. I
That's
think
why.
part of what we need to do is these generations need to understand that baby boomers in the traditionalists can't make it anymore because they're too old, and somebody else is going to have to start doing it.
But that's something too, we have no idea. We have no idea, because what we see all the time are solutions. What we see all the time are answers. We see the lights and we're like, okay, great. You call someone to get lights and you get the lights. You call someone to get the chairs and you get the chairs. And it's that, and it's also, if you're looking at a science problem or something like that, and you want a quick solution to an answer, you type it in online, you get the answer. Do you take the time to go through all of the work and the solution to get there? No.
But that's one reason that what can happen in this room today, by the end of the day, is so powerful. Is if you can bring that industry into the classroom,
Yeah,
bring
that's
those.
one of the things we're struggle with
Yeah.
as a country. That with all that manufacturing, once in place, also innovation and thinking, brain power, everything else.
This is a turning point, though, from what I understand. That some of those jobs that have gone offshore are starting to come back.
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of, in some areas at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a thing called reshoring.org, reshoring.org, there's a lot about that, but I think in order to really have it happen faster, we have to start having people wonder, well, let's make it here. Let's make it here, what do I have to do to get part of it? Just let people look at buildings and bridges and think of stuff all of a sudden just happen.
No.
Right.
People are building these skyscrapers and stuff, but those people that are doing it are, tradesmen and
And we were talking earlier about the lack of tradesmen who are out there. And part of it, it's huge. The awareness in the classrooms isn't there. Because we did go through this stage, I admit it as a teacher, we went through this stage in education where we tried to send everybody to college. You know, and it just, it has, now we're reaping the problem that relates from that with the imbalance. So I like what Hannah said about what you're used to seeing are solutions and not the way we got there, not the products, the way that the products were built and developed.
Well, I think a lot of people now think that, you know, if you need it, buy it, versus if you need it, make it.
Yep.
So
Well,
so
it's,
that, you know,
yeah, if you need it, buy it as opposed to make it.
Well, maybe I can actually make it, and people like that, the younger generation, you know, well, just buy it.
Right.
So is it,
That's my point about politics, because the government says we're giving you money to buy it. So that's a problem.
and so the,
It's only gonna last so long, and then it's gonna not work.
exactly, because it won't hold up, the system won't hold. However, what I see in this room is a marvelous potential, because we've got people sitting in this room, guidance counselors and other educators who are willing to bring that awareness of industry and manufacturing into the school. And we've got business people here who are willing to work with that process too, and to say, here's what we need, and make that cross-generation and that cross-fertilization happen. I mean, that's the magic of what you guys can do here. And as Hannah said to begin with, we speak to a lot of groups, a lot of corporate groups usually, and this is such an unusual and marvelous thing that you're doing, such a far-sighted thing. Let's do one other comment.
Wanted to add to what Dave was talking about, using my son Brian again as an example. We run a machine shop, and Brian is in a program here at Big State who did an internship with us. And what Hannah says, we had him on a machine. He's to me, taking raw material and adding value, so it goes into a product. We're selling to NASA, so Tech can contribute to the community and all of the bigger picture stuff. And I actually went through and explained all that to him and talked to him about it. You see the light bulbs go off. And I think baby boomers and other generations understood that bigger picture.
Yep.
He did that. So explaining to him that the value in what you're doing, you're making components that are going to go into something that has purpose and meaning, really helped him understand it wasn't just drilling a hole and giving some trivial little sweeping the floor or something like that.
It's that connecting the dots and explaining why and how this has an impact. Because like, as you said, we can assume that because of the era in which we grew up, and we forget to express that to
Well,
millennials.
it's frustrating me that I have to explain that to him.
It is. It is.
Why would I have to explain that, right?
And you know, from the perspective of a millennial person, we're like, why is this frustrating to you? I have no idea. I have no clue. So it is. It's one of those.
It's like, I
one of
can
those
see I'm
gaps,
making
one
you
of those
crazy.
gaps.
Why?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's transition now, and thank you everyone for sharing. We are going to have more time for Q&A at the end, so just kind of keep track of anything that comes to mind as we go along here throughout the rest of this. And we're going to shift. So we've talked about traditionalists and baby boomers, and we're going to talk about Generation X.
Do we need to do, are we doing trivia?
Oh, you know what? Are we doing music trivia right now? Did Iowa stop us from doing music trivia?
Oh, we don't want to.
Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Pull out your music trivia sheets. I can't believe I almost skipped over that. All right, number 6. All right. Name of song, name of artist, you're all singing it, or at least 80 years. Okay, what, trivia question is, what is the name of this group's longtime drummer? What is the name of this group's longtime drummer? All right, next. Trivia number 7.
Don't turn off the boss.
I know. Amy. She just broke one of the rules.
I know, sorry.
Name of song, name of artist, the full name.
Not just the boss.
Not just the nickname. And the trivia question is, in what state was this American rocker born and raised? In what state was this American rocker born and raised? Oh, so high five.
Extra point if you know the city.
Extra point if you know the city, which I don't know, but Amy clearly does.
Okay, shall we do Generation X?
Let's do Generation X. So music trivia away. And let's talk about this generation. I know there are a lot of you here in the room. So when we talk about events and conditions for this generation's formative years, the number one event or condition for Generation X is the emergence of 24-hour media. By the time the average Xer reached the age of 20, they had watched 23,000 hours of television. And for all of the Xers in the room, MTV was in its prime during this time. So what music videos do you remember on MTV? Thriller. Donna Madonna, yeah, Video Killed Radio Star, these were all huge. At the same time, CNN, Ted Turner, Xers were watching institutions that had been built by traditionalists and greatly improved upon by boomers, all being called into question. Religion, big companies, government. So as a result, this is an incredibly skeptical generation. And we were doing a focus group at Bridgeworks, and there was an Xer in the room who said, "You name the institution, and I can name the crimes."
Yeah. You have to remember, this is a generation that was old enough to hear one president say, "I am not a," and then another president say, "I do not have."
Exactly.
Make you a little skeptical.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah, that is not entail. Wait, the answers are everything.
so these institutions, they were falling apart on television, and at the same time, the most sacred institution, that of marriage, it was falling apart on the home front. During the Gen X birth years, the divorce rate tripled. So as a result, we have this whole generation, and you know the term latchkey kids. This is a whole group who was coming home to empty homes. Both parents were working or they were divorced, and they're putting their own food into the microwave. And they're organizing their own after-school activities, and they're watching MTV. So this is a generation of incredibly independent operators, and they bring that independence with them into the workforce. So to an Xer, you give them a project, and they're like, "Great, thanks. Tell me what you want, where you want it, how you want it, when you want it. Now I'm going to go away. Hopefully, you're going to go away, and then we can get it done." So they have this fierce independence, but at the heart of Xers is that skepticism. And when we talk about Xers and their movement into the workplace, I mean, this is a generation that saw their parents and their neighbors and their parents' friends all being part of these big layoffs in the 70s and the 80s. So they had this completely different mentality than, say, the baby boomer generation. And Monster.com was really the first company to reach these heartstrings of Generation X. And this is an example of a commercial from one of their campaigns.
When I grow up, I want to fly all day.
I want to climb my way up to middle management. Be replaced on a lamp. I want to have a brown nose.
I want to be a yes man, yes woman, yes sir, coming sir, anything for a raise, sir. When I grow up, I want to be underappreciated.
Be paid less for doing the same job.
I want to be forced into early retirement.
That's a laugh or to cry, right? So these Gen Xers show up, they are naturally skeptical about business, skeptical about education, skeptical about government, about religion. Naturally a skeptical generation that pushes back. And what do they want to hear when they come into the workplace? They want straight talk. How many Xers in the audience have thought, "I'm going to lose my mind if that baby boomer doesn't quit tiptoeing around the truth"? Anybody? Just nod your head, you don't have to raise your hand. Yeah, so the Gen Xer wants straight talk, honest and unfiltered, give me the facts. Now, this also, you probably noticed this if you're educators in particular, this plays out in the classroom too. The Gen Xers, when coming through school, you could give them criticism. You could give them a negative grade on the paper, and they didn't break down and cry all over the desk. Something the millennials are famous for, I'm sorry to say. A lot of Kleenex goes, Kleenex stock probably went up when millennials entered the workplace, I'm not sure. But because it's very, very hard for millennials to take negative feedback sometimes, I'm generalizing.
It's true.
Yeah, And that is because us baby boomer parents raised them during the self-esteem movement of the 1990s. There was a reason we told them they were wonderful.
You were wonderful.
You are so special. I love it. And that's what I told my daughters. You know, my father would say to me, you know, if I was saying something, he would say, you think you're special. What did I say to my daughters? So special. I meant it. I knew that the culture was hard on them. I knew the community with which we lived was increasingly anonymous. I knew they were faced with violence up close and personal, in real time. And so I sought to build their self-esteem. And we all know, particularly educators, you know all those stats that came out about falling self-esteem during the 90s, about rising rates of depression among young people. So we were concerned about that. So we raised millennials during that self-esteem movement. And so when they come into the workplace, it can be harder for them to take feedback. As a matter of fact, in one survey that we did at Bridgeworks, we found that across the board, only 5% of all our respondents said millennials were prepared to take feedback. Yeah, 5%.
Yeah, and you know, when we do receive that negative feedback for the first time, it can be pretty rocky. I'm a perfect example of this. So the first time I received truly very negative feedback was when I was a freshman in college. Signed up for a writing course. Everyone at my university was required to take one. And I walked in like, I was good at writing in high school. This is going to be a piece of cake. And the class discussion was great, and I felt really on top of things, and it came time to turn in my first paper. And of course, I gave it to my professor, like, here you go. You're welcome. Enjoy that later. And this professor was fantastic, and of course, gave us our papers back 2 days later, and then I take it and I turn it over, and there's a huge C on it, and there's red all over the paper. So of course, my reaction, naturally, the blood is rushing to my face. I'm like, what's happening? My professor, who was an Xer, all she said was, all right, there's your papers. If you have questions, come talk to me after class. See me in office hours. Have a good day. I left, called my mom, of course, was crying.
Mom talked you down off the list.
A little bit, because I was saying things like, I shouldn't be in college right now. I can't believe this. I was always good at things. This can't be true. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And my mom very lovingly said, well, why don't you just go talk to her? I was like, I can't talk to her. Are you kidding me? She's just going to give me more negative feedback. So I was thinking about this paper for a long time because it was really eating at me. And I decided to go talk to her 3 weeks later. And I walk into her office and very hesitantly, and I'm like, hi, I want to talk to you about my paper. And she said, Hannah, geez, it took you forever to come in here. You have potential, you just need to work on it. Let's talk about it, sit down. So I realized in that moment that I was, of course, being very silly and ridiculous because this Xer professor of mine, she would not have marked up my paper so much and not have given me so much constructive feedback if she didn't care about how I could improve. And that was a hard lesson for me, but I'm very glad that I was fortunate enough to learn it early on in my college years. But there are a whole lot of millennials out there like me, and I'm sure that some of you probably have had some experiences with them because we bring this anxiety with us about negative feedback into the workplace. And so there is something really easy to do about this. And you know, we've worked with a lot of companies and a lot of clients, and they have this millennial turnover, and they don't understand. They don't understand why it's happening. And we look at the exit interviews, and almost every single time, it can be traced back to that first time they received feedback. Because if a millennial gets negative feedback, but they don't receive a plan about how to improve, they can just feel completely deflated and they check out. So something that you can do is give them feedback. Millennials, we respond to constant feedback, so hearing it more than just once every year. And when we do receive feedback, if it is negative, because of course that's going to happen, we make mistakes all the time, and we need help. But when we do, give us a plan. Help us learn how we can be better. Because if we see that we're not doing something correctly, but we see how we can be doing something so much better down the line, we'll want to do it. And then we'll feel motivated to push through that feedback so then we can get that wonderful positive feedback that we do love hearing so much.
Now, before we jump on this bandwagon and make too much, I'm sorry, I was making fun of the millennials for not being able to take feedback.
Right.
But I do love the clip that we have that kind of illustrates the way that millennials were raised by us and their parents.
What's that?
It's you! The wall of Gaylord. The wall of Gaylord? Isn't it nice to finally display your accomplishments, son?
Oh, you got your awards. That's great.
It's my champion.
Oh, I didn't know they made 9th place ribbons.
Oh, yeah, they got them all the way up to 10th place. We have always tried to instill a sense of self in Gaylord without being too goal-oriented. Not about winning or losing. It's about passion. We just wanted him to love what he's doing. You know what I mean, Jay?
Not really, Bernard. I think a competitive drive is the essential key that makes America the only remaining superpower in the world today.
Well, whatever works.
Hannah was talking about that constant feedback. And by constant, well, the word frequent comes up, we say give frequent feedback. And for a boomer, that means monthly, right?
Sure.
Right. But for a millennial, it means
weekly if possible. I mean, really we want it every single day, every single project, but that is not realistic.
Any of you who are Gen Xers, have you noticed the tendency of millennials to linger over your desk with questions? And then another question, and then another question. So it's something that we have to learn how to manage. If you're a Gen Xer, or if you're a boomer, you may be more tolerant of that. But if you're a Gen Xer, you may think, get out of here. I'm gonna, I want to work at my own pace in my own space. I'd rather sit in a cave all day and do my work than have to deal with this constant back and forth. So it's a huge collision between hyper-collaborative millennials and hyper-independent Gen Xers. We see it all the time in our work. The Gen Xer who has a group of millennials to manage, and Gen Xer goes to the door, looks out, all the millennials are out there. They're not only talking to each other, they're online together in Google Hangout, and they're texting each other. And it's all blah, 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 back and forth, back and forth. And the Gen Xer's like, I'm not going up there. It's a mosh pit. It's a mess out there. It's scary. I've got work to do. As a matter of fact, I got so tickled a few weeks ago. I was talking to one Gen X manager, and she showed me a text that she'd gotten. It was like, brain session 7. That was a text that she got. And what it meant was that her millennial team, how many of you would know what to do with that? Show up at 7. Perfect. Perfect. It's an invitation that a millennial sent her. It works for her. It's an invitation to come to the brainstorming session at 7 in the cafe in the company where they work. Now, what she was telling me, her frustration was that not only would they brain session at 7, they would hang out in somebody's cubicle all day. They'd also be online hanging out and exchanging ideas all day long. They would go for drinks after work, and they would Skype that night. They were like, "Do you want to join us?" She's like, "No," because she's a Gen Xer. She's a Gen Xer, and all that constant give and take gets in her way, as opposed to moving the work forward. But for millennials, it moves the work forward.
It does, because we grew up and teamwork is our middle name. We always want to work in groups. I mean, if you just think too about the messaging that we heard when we were growing up, it shows how different we are. Xers, when you were growing up, the messaging you heard was, if you want something done right, do it yourself. Millennials, messaging we've heard is, there's no I in team. 2 heads are better than 1. 3 heads are better than 2. We are stronger together than we are apart. So we do have this mentality. We want to collaborate all the time. But that does not always work, because other people of other generations are like, that is not productive. And we talk to a lot of Xers and a lot of Xer managers, and they say, we love to collaborate. That's great, but there's a very efficient way to do it. We brainstorm first. We come up with 3 big ideas, and then we come together and collaborate. So millennials, we don't really know about this. And again, it's just teaching us how to collaborate. And it's teaching us when to do this. Knowing that collaboration is fantastic. It's saying, love your ideas. When we're batting down those Xers' doors, we're like, we have so many ideas, and I want to stop you in the hallway, and can I kind of come over here and tell you this now? We just thought of this really great idea. I'm going to shoot you a text. It's like, hold on to those. Just keep them in.
We're from Minneapolis, the home of Betty Crocker. And there was a millennial who actually showed up for an internship there a few years ago. She brought in a recipe the first day that she wanted the company to do, a new product, first day. It was just so natural for her to bring her ideas forward all the time.
All the time.
She had to learn how and when to present those.
Yes. And when we learn how and when to present those, we learn how and when we can bring our voice to the table. And we know that when we have those opportunities, we can make an impression in the work that we're doing, and we can maybe move some of our big ideas forward. So it's just taking those moments to teach us how to collaborate. So we've talked about all the generations working with millennials, and we've talked about how explaining the why is so incredibly important, about structuring collaboration, about connecting the dots for us. So we talked about all about that stuff about the millennials. But what about the generation that's coming next? So I'm sure that many of you are working with them right now in high schools. I mean, the oldest of them is going to be in the workforce this coming fall. This is the group born from 1996 to about 2010. The exact year isn't complete yet because there hasn't been enough time that's gone by. But you're working with a lot of these people, and some of them are your children. And I will say too that those people who are in their upper ages of Generation Ed, when we talk about cuspers, this is playing out with them too. Because it's not like someone goes to sleep December 31st, 1995, and another person is born on January 1st, 1996, and is a completely different person. There aren't hard and fast rules with those years. But we want to talk to you about this next generation because we are really excited about them, and they have so much to offer. They're looking different than millennials. And the easiest way that we have found to really tell you about who they are is through 3 trends that we're seeing. But overall, I would say the overarching theme with this generation is that Generation Edge sees the world a little differently.
Yeah, no, Hannah. Oh, I'm sorry. The digital natives, that's what I can read.
This is in Dutch, which is, does anybody here speak Dutch? Okay, that's good, because I translated this with, of course, Google Translate, and so I wonder if it means something but different than what that tells me. What it says is digital natives see the world differently. And digital natives is the word that they use. We use Generation Edge.
Yeah, and I know Hannah's knee-deep in the research on Gen Edge right now, but you're spending a lot of time with 12-year-olds at present, right?
Yeah, I mean, every age. Every age.
Research, yeah. One of the trends that we're seeing, which is huge, is speed, because this is a generation that grew up with even more technology than before at their fingertips, and in fact connected. The newest device that's going to be with us very soon is that iPhone that does everything that's on your wrist. It's literally connected to your body. So they are growing up with technology at their fingertips. They're faster than ever. They can find information in a heartbeat, even faster than millennials could. In fact, they're going to be so good at processing data, the data that comes to them digitally and through technology, that when we study their IQs are predicted to be, classical IQ studies may be very high because of that fast ability to process. The other thing that's important to kind of think about with this group that I think is surprising to me when I look at things is their resourcefulness, because they're going to be so good at finding solutions that they're not going to be quite like the millennials who may come to you with questions. This group is more likely to go online and find that solution. They're likely to be very resourceful. And if they can't find a solution or an answer, they're going to create it. We're seeing them as very resourceful and fairly independent. And very practical. They're kind of an interesting group.
Yeah, and if you even just extend that a little bit further, Amy mentioned millennials. The first person that we go to, and we found this in studies and the research that we've done at Bridgeworks, is you go to mom and dad, or you go to your teacher. If you have a big question about buying an apartment, or you need to fix your car, you ask mom and dad. But this generation, they don't do that. They look online first. So the second trend that we're seeing with them, I call "You've Got a Friend in Me." Because this is a generation that has been through a lot. I mean, this is the generation that has grown up in the heart of the Great Recession. They've seen global terrorism and a lot of tragic national events blasted at them 24 hours a day through social media. It's just the norm for them. And the people they turn to in these situations are their friends. And most often the way they're turning to them is through technology. And this is actually, I know that sometimes this can be kind of a challenge because people are seeing these people who are connected to technology all the time. It's like they can't have any relationships with people in person. It's so hard for them. But what's so cool about them, and what I actually am really impressed by, is that they develop strong relationships with people online. They can do it through Skype, they can do it through Facebook. They're able to have these conversations that even I as a millennial struggle to have. So there's a study that was done and it found that 26% of Gen Edgers say they have friends who are playing right away. Half of their Facebook friends are playing right away. So in the workforce, what this means is that they're going to be able to develop relationships with anyone, anywhere. And they can do this so easily and with such ease that it's no problem whatsoever. And I think that especially, as the world in the broader scale is going to be going more global, they're just going to be able to develop these relationships in a heartbeat. And I think that's a really big advantage that they're going to in the workforce. Third trend that we're seeing with them is a participation award is not a real award. And I do think that we have some Gen X parents, maybe some in the room, to thank for this, because Gen Edgers are really learning the art of failure.
From their Gen X parents.
Yeah, because it isn't normal to get a 6th place honorable mention trophy in a swim meet when 6 people were in the race.
Are you pointing to yourself?
Maybe.
Okay, you got that right.
It's not realistic. And so what we're finding is because this is more of a realistic generation and we have these Gen X parents, they are going to bring a really fierce competitive fire back into the workforce. And I was actually speaking with a university women's basketball coach just a couple weeks ago, and she was telling me she works with a lot of high school girls and a lot of people starting from the age of about 6th grade to 11th grade. And she said she has never seen, in her 30 years of coaching, she has never seen kids as competitive as they are today. So every generation, they bring something new and wonderful into the workplace. I mean, boomers brought that optimism, that idealism. Xers brought that challenging of the status quo. Millennials brought that collaboration and that power to create innovation from that. And Gen Edgers, they're going to be bringing this competitive fire. And I think that's really exciting to see how that is going to play out in the workforce.
I'm curious, since we have a lot of guidance counselors here and other educators who deal with Gen Ed. This is, by the way, only in the last year or two have we begun to parse out and separate this group from the millennial generation. Millennials very much shaped by the laptop computer, very much shaped by the internet, very much shaped by social media, but not as much as the Edgers. That sense of really being shaped deeply by interactive social media, visual social media, is profound. And we begin to see differences, and we began just in the last couple of years to separate this group out. So I'm curious, because you guys are working with this group, if this rings true, or if you have other observations about this group, about how fast they are, how competitive they are, how interactive they are. Do you have observations about this group? Yes. In K through 8, your girls are much more competitive. They'll knock you over.
Yeah.
They're competitive. And the boys are really heavily into tech. Interesting. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
He'll say, Mom, and then he doesn't ask you that question. He looks on his phone and says, never mind, Mom, because he'll find the answer himself.
Right.
Yeah. And so he uses the phone to facilitate your conversation, but not because he's looking to you for the answer.
Mm-hmm. All at the same time.
At the same time, connecting with his friends and doing his homework, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And that affects all of us. Nobody calls. My phone doesn't ring. You know, people email me, they text me, but it's the same. You know, when did my phone ring? It was ages ago. Yeah. Call me, please. Yeah. Yes.
I have a 16-year-old son in algebra 2, and it drives him crazy that his teacher can't tell him why I need to know these formulas. How does it relate to me in real life? Over this whole year, he's good in math, but he struggles with the fact that he can't relate that to how that's going to work with him in the workplace. So when you put out that slide, that made It will help me at home, talking to them about, why this is so important.
Right. And he's seen so much change, he's got to know why. Why do I need to know this?
Yeah, and he was such a sight, he was this wonderful teacher who other people like, but she won't tell me why, no, she won't tell me why.
Yeah.
We hear that so much, and I mean, just working working with this university, almost all of them, I said, do you have any advice to give your professors? And a lot of them said, a lot were engineers and in science, and they said, no one tells me why this part is important. And it's like, of course it is. And yeah, so that's really common.
It's so important in the workplace too, that
It is.
why do we do it this way? You know, the millennials say, why are we doing it this way? And there is a reason usually. You can dredge it up. You know, and, oh yeah, there is a reason we established this process or do it this way. And then of course the question is, do we need to update that? Do we need to change that? But that why is critical if they're going to buy into that process. Yes?
I'm wondering if you're seeing anything in terms of their ability to multitask.
Oh yeah.
Because I have a daughter who she listens to music, she's communicating with her friends, and she's doing her homework. So I'm wondering if her school, is that something you can project into what we see?
Yes.
Even more.
Even
Yes.
more. And Amy mentioned that too in the brain chemistry and the way they process information. So I'm sure a lot of you know that you can't actually multitask. It's your brain switching tasks back and forth. This generation, and this honestly as a millennial kind of freaks me out because they can do it so quickly. So it means nothing to them to like go from here to that, to that, to that, to that, to that. And so on one hand, that is something so positive about them is that they are able to do a lot of different things at one time. Of course, the challenge is that when they have to sit down and focus on something for a long period of time, it's a challenge. And it's kind of, they're going to have to relearn that skill because they are so accustomed to going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think sometimes it's hard too, and what we've heard from people is that that's very distracting to people from other generations. It's like you're looking at your phone, you're not listening to me.
Yeah.
We're in a meeting, can you not be looking and checking your email right now? What are you doing? But for them, they don't know that that's not normal, that you can't maybe do that as quickly as they can. And I include myself, and a person's like, you're distracting me right now. Stop looking on Facebook. And so that is something too with their multitasking. I think in the future, it's something that will have to be more structured around when you can use your multiple devices.
And we have to be careful about the difference between perception and reality.
Yeah.
I see some heads nodding. If in fact the work is getting done, if in fact the learning is happening, then multitasking is not a problem. If it's not getting done, the learning is not happening, then multitasking is a problem.
Right.
If in fact we've got to go deep and make a strategic decision, multitasking doesn't work. But if it's transactional, if it's keeping a lot of balls in the air, if it's taking care of business in a fast way, then multitasking can work. So we have to really, and this is so hard for me, because it irritates me, to see somebody multitasking when I'm trying to talk to them. If the work is getting done, then I have to work on my perception as opposed to how I know.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's take maybe one more question, and then we'll kind of close up here.
I don't know if you can hear the mother of a 12 and 14, two girls 12 and 14, they multitask all the time, get straight A's. Do they multitask while they're doing their homework? That's the darndest thing. I couldn't have done that. I grew up reading. R-E-A-D-I-N-G, reading. Yeah, slow. Yes.
Right.
But they know everything about everybody in the community, all the kids are listening. But it's just such a sad moment, older girls, older boys, the cookies and whatever, and then all of them are, no, what happened to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually texted her over, and I told her mother, I hope it doesn't matter, but I'm going to call her, maybe she'll have her phone at the door, and they did. And it was tough for them to talk to each other at first.
It is, because this is shared communication.
But then it
Right.
and so that, for me, that is the biggest piece. I hope they're able to make that leap to actually see.
I don't know if you could hear her. Could everybody hear her? Okay, there was a sleepover at her house, a group of girls in the basement, and it was a sad moment for you because she went downstairs and they were all heads down over the phone. They weren't talking to each other. So the next, they weren't talking to each other.
Well, they were.
Oh, they were talking to each other.
But they were talking about what was on their phones.
Speaking to each other, because what he said is maybe I need to get, maybe I need to understand
That they were talking to each other, that they were enriching the conversation with even more people than it could have been before. Now, were they using face-to-face skills? No. But were they talking to each other? Yeah. But at the next sleepover, she had them check their phones at the door. And how did they respond? Positively when it was done? They liked it when it was said enough. And I think there's a lesson there, whether we're in the workplace or in the educational setting, they've got to have a balance. Our brains demand a balance. There's a different brain chemistry when you're doing this from when you're doing this. And we just got to have that balance and we're going to be healthy together. Yes.
I think that this particular conversation, I think, is extremely important. It's just fascinating. I think one of the greatest problems that we have in society today is the lack of long-range thinking and planning. And if people are growing up in an environment where they're rewarded for the back and forth, the short term and immediate gratification, the inability to do long-range thinking and planning is something that's not going to become up. It's what we need, whether it's in the legislatures, in Congress, or in Washington, or any place. This is a real problem. We've got a generation that's not developing those skills. I think we are in some real trouble.
Yeah, and I think you're both those skills, that immediate transactional, I can handle all this data and I can see the patterns in it, is really important. But that ability to go deep and to focus and to see forward is incredibly important too. That's the hard task that's in front of educators today. It's a really hard task.
And I will say too, I mean, exactly to your point, it's a huge challenge because the millennial mindset that we kind of grew up in is, well, I can work at this job for maybe 1 or 2 years, and then if that doesn't really work out for me, I don't feel like I'm doing that well, or I don't get enough opportunities, I'm just going to go try something else. Which is so hard for other generations to hear. They're like, you cannot do that. That's not secure, that's not safe. Do you know about retirement? Like you need to set yourself up for success. But millennials think they're setting themselves up for success in that. Because going from different jobs, you're learning different skills and learning new opportunities. And we talk a lot about, engaging people and starting to get them to think long term. And there are so many elements that go into that. And there are so many practices that really work in tandem and work together to get people to start thinking that way.
And it's also totally normal, of course, when young people come into industry and they can only think in terms of semesters, right? That's the horizon, a semester long. That's just the way that our brains work sometimes at that life stage, and it's all that they had experienced. But one thing to keep in mind is that we've had some studies that tell us that this job jumping that Hannah's talking about is prevalent in early 20s. And then something happens about age 26. It's kind of like a bump in the road, and it slows down. So if you're in business and you've got people and they come and they stay only a year and you're just barely beginning to get your value back from them, and then they decide to go where the grass is greener, you know it's not greener over there, but they're going to go, make sure you leave that door open. Make sure you leave that door wide open. Keep contacting them, keep talking to them, keep them on your email list, invite them to company events. Make that door wide open and invite them back to work for you if you like them every 6 months. Because they will slow down those moves as they move through their 20s, and you get them back and they're better than they were before because they've got that added experience.
And I will say, especially in a community like this one, I mean, this isn't Silicon Valley, where people go out and plan on being for 2 years, and then afterwards they're like, do I stay here, or do I move back to the community I came from? And so that's something that's so great about this community is that it has so many resources and so much support, and there's relationships here that they know that they can come back to. And that is something with millennials is we go back to a world that we understand. Like, we go back and live with mom and dad, where, it's funny because so many of us do, and so many people rely on that. It's also very powerful because there is a strength there's a bond, and we feel like we can see ourselves long term in a place like that. So I will say something I think that's unique actually to this kind of community in this region.
Yes.
So we are running a little low on time, so I just want to make sure that we close out and that we score our music trivia and everything. So just pull out your sheets. We got one more, and then we'll split, and then we'll be all done here. All right, name of song, name of artist, and the trivia question is, he was originally a member of this boy band. He was originally a member of this boy band. Okay, so we are going to score this now, and the way it works is there's a point for each line, for each question, so there's a total of 24 points that you can get. So, number 1, name of song.
Brown Eyed Girl.
Name of artist.
Van Morrison.
Van Morrison.
What country does he hail from?
Ireland.
Northern Ireland. Number 2, name of song.
Ring of Fire.
Name of artist.
Johnny Cash.
And the trivia question, not so colorful nickname? Man in Black. Number 3, name of song. Let's hear it for the boys. Yes. Name of artist. Denise Williams. Really tough one. Song on the soundtrack of what movie? Footloose. All right, number 4, name of song.
So crazy right now?
Crazy in Love. Crazy in Love. Name of artist? Beyonce. And her 90s group? Destiny's Child. Recently made a comeback. They were amazing. Number 5, name of song.
Staying Alive.
Staying Alive. Name of artist?
Bee
Gees. And the 3 brothers in the group?
Barry, Robin, and Andy.
Andy, Barry, and Maurice.
It's actually Robin, Barry, and Maurice. It's Robin.
Who was the cute?
Number 6, name of song. Satisfaction. Name of artist.
Rolling Stones.
And the name of the group's longtime drummer?
Charlie Watts.
Who was it?
Bill Wyman.
Oh, Bill Wyman.
Okay. Challenge? What's your challenge? I honestly don't know if someone pulls it up on their phone. I'll let you pull it out right now. Charlie Watts.
All right, get it.
Obviously. All right, next we need a song.
We get 0.5 here.
Glory Days, name of artist. Bruce Springsteen. And the state where he was born and raised.
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Extra point for Ashbury Park.
Yep. So we get 2 points.
Wait, no, his first album was called Hello from Home.
You said the town you lived in?
That was what? Yes, and that was, not the town where you grew up. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry.
So Redmond is where you grew up. You get an extra point if you got that right. I'm trusting you.
I will too.
Yes. Okay. And number 8, name of song.
La Vida Loca.
Live La Vida Loca. Yes. Name of artist.
Ricky Martin.
Ricky Martin, and a member of what boy band?
Menudo.
Menudo. Correct. All right. Total of 24 points. Add them up.
Okay. Well, ask you to stand if you got, let's say, 18 points.
18 points or more.
Stand up.
Oh, wow. Okay. 19. 20 points.
20 down.
Sit down if we pass your number. 20 points. 21 points.
Wow.
22. 23.
Diversity of the
24.
Thank you so much for playing. And I know it's fun to play music trivia, but there is a purpose. There is a reason we play music. You're educators, you know this. Because over the years, as we've played music trivia, we've found repeatedly that the tables that win usually have a very wide spread of ages and you had one culture vulture on the table. Obviously, what we extrapolate from that is that when we work with industries, when we work with communities, what we find is the group that brings the most voices to the table, the widest group, is the group that wins in so many ways. So I want to thank you today, and
Yes.
to Jim and to everybody, to Ed and to everybody who helped us bring this together.
Yes, and we hope that we've been able to just kind of plant some food for thought in your minds that will really help, foster those conversations later on today. And just as a closing thought, it's not about who's right or wrong, and it's not about who's better or worse. It's just about understanding and celebrating the unique perspectives that every generation brings to the table. So thank you very much for all your time today.
I'll just shout it out here. Thank you, Amy and Hannah, for what you brought to us. It's more than food for thought. It's helping us get out of our own view of the world. Recognize that we're crossing generations, cultures, communication styles, and I mentioned before when Molly came up that one of the biggest thing that we can think about is what can I do to help? But you're also reminding us that sometimes we can say, I need your help. You've got something that I don't have. Can you help me figure out how to raise quality control without losing time? Can you help me do this and that? And not go all the way back to probably a couple of people in here remember what it was like to be supervised in the 1930s and 40s, which was something like, you just do what I tell you and you'll be fine. At the end of the week, I'll pay you what you're worth, which may mean you'll owe me money. And we move from, I need to know what you know. I need to know how to make this job work better because of how you think about it differently than I do. And I think that's more than just stimulating for thought. I think it's getting us outside of our own show. We're going to break now for 15 minutes. We're a little bit behind. We're about 8 minutes behind. That's not bad. So thank you both for keeping us on time as well. For being very interesting and keeping us thinking and doing in an entertaining way. I know you've heard that. That's called excellent feedback.